Everybody, this is Ishan Islam from the Neurosphere, and today I'll be talking about the person who got me interested into neuroscience in the first instance, Phineas Gage. This is quite an interesting case to me. However, I'll be just touching on it so it's understandable for everyone while still going into specific terminologies such as phrenology, for example, TBIs, and furthermore, of course, that you find out later in the video. But the reason he interests me so much is that he somehow survived with a 3-foot iron rod in height, obviously shoved through his skull, and he only suffered minor injuries such as not even speech. His speech wasn't really affected. His anger issues obviously occurred from this, but he recovered quite well, and this really gave an insight and pushed into development of neuroscience, which I of course find very fascinating. Nevertheless, we'll look more into it within this video. So apart from a guy who got his head struck with a rod, he was a railroad foreman in Vermont. And this is not really something crazy, as this was quite a common job during this time. But I'm pretty sure there was a piece of TNT that was near him. Well, not a piece of TNT, it was a rock that had an iron rod shoved within it. And I don't know, there was a piece of TNT. This isn't really a clear story because there's not a lot of accounts of witnesses seeing this happen. But there was a piece of TNT and it exploded. The rocket, of course, dissipated but pushed the rod out due to the potential energy, and it flung into his skull, and it didn't even get stuck. It literally just swiped right through his head. And it of course damaged his left frontal lobe, which at this time people did not really correlate parts of the brain to specific bodily functions or attitudes such as speaking or movement, etc. It would mostly be the skull size, which is basically the definition of phrenology. Basically, phrenology was where the skull would be a factor, only the skull size and shape, etc. Just everything to do with the skull. This was the reasoning for specific ways people would act, etc. But of course, this got debunked by this due to his actual frontal lobe being damaged, and this, of course, people thought that entire skull deformities would be as a result of this difference in attitude, but it was only a specific part of his brain which led to this. Nevertheless, the miracle from this story is basically that he survived immediately after without any issues, and from the small witness accounts that we do have, he was speaking normally and he had normal movement, where he walked to the doctor's office to meet Dr. John Harlow, where he almost died to an infection later. But this was quite expected during this time due to the lack of antiseptic environments being used in the work environment of hospitals and treatment centers. And so this isn't really a crazy fact that he almost died to infection later. However, he didn't, I'm pretty sure. But now that the story is over and why this was a miracle, but we know that now, but why is this a neurological breakthrough in the first place? Well, I spoke about how it debunked phrenology as a whole, and of course it would give us further understanding towards injuries in veterans, athletes and soldiers in the future. And this meant that in the hospital people would be able to identify diseases, or maybe not diseases, actions and maybe neurological disorders, relating it to the brain rather than the skull, which was obviously not very how can I say it, not very educated of them to do. But with that in mind, it also gave us an insight into how neuroplasticity could have been a reason for Gage's partial recovery. Now, neuroplasticity, you've just seen this big word, you're wondering where it is. Well, this is just the brain's ability to form new connections after, of course, damage to it, which like as I said above, it supported in the understanding of traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, as I mentioned at the start of the video. But this neuroplasticity would make new connections between neurons in the brain. And with constant use, as the brain is a muscle, multiple muscles and neurons, and working on nerve impulses as a whole, these nerve impulses would have to find a different path to travel down in order to perform different actions. And this could have been a reason for Gage's partial recovery, because he did recover, but not completely, as he was changed from certain accounts. He went from being very polite, nice, etc., to very low, like short tempered and angry, of course, all the time. And this is why it gave us an insight into the frontal lobe being a factor of how someone's personality would be like. And it was obviously as a relation to Phineas Gage's change in attitude after his initial injury. Now, this is all very important because neuroplasticity was as a result of the debunking of phrenology, because neuroplasticity didn't become an idea until phrenology was debunked. I've just repeated what I've said, but in a different way that was understandable, obviously, because there wouldn't be neuroplasticity if people still believed that the skull was responsible for these things. And there were multiple ethical issues with phrenology as well, since it could have been linked to racism. Doctors could have measured a certain individual's head at a different size and taken his measurements wrong in purpose, just to make people seem like more, in a sense, less able to do certain things. And this was, of course, a big ethical issue. Now, everyone's brain is the same now as we know today, and so this obviously would be a big breakthrough in not only neurological senses, but in society as a whole, as people would have maybe less of a reason to see people of different, I know it sounds silly, but different head sizes to be more or less advantaged to each other. Nevertheless, back to my other slide, the medical miracle. Now, yes, he did survive immediately after without any issues to his speaking and movement, but he did have major blood loss, and at this time, blood transfusions were they were at their discovery stage at this time, because, of course, to the brain especially, it would exist for smaller things like, say, pregnancy, maybe if you were to get a C-section done. But with the brain needs a rich blood supply in order to work, and also on the off note, if you did get too much of a blood supply to the brain, and there would and obviously a blood clot would form, you'd get a stroke. And linking to phrenology, a stroke could be due to maybe they would look at the skull and see maybe a different part of it. A part of it looks different to someone else's, and this would obviously be a reason for stroke happening, which is obviously wrong, as we now know today that is formed by too little oxygen reaching the brain, whether it be from whatever reason, but it would most likely be a blood clot. Nevertheless, thank you very much for watching. This was quite a short video because there are not many studies done on Phineas Gage, but I will link all the citations and references in the description if you would like to look more into it. And the motto of this channel, I've decided over my last video, would be exploring the brain one neuron at a time, and I believe this was the best video to start with, as we can link this to neuroplasticity, where we're linking we're building our knowledge one neuron at a time. So yeah, if you would like to connect, just comment what you would like to see next below, and I'll try my best to reply to it wherever possible. And nevertheless, if you like the video, and subscribe if you liked what you saw. And next Wednesday you will see a video similar to this based on your requests, and if there are no requests, I will just make a video most likely based on the frontal lobe, following from where this video left off. Anyways, yeah, thank you for watching. Have a good day.